Hello and welcome to this brief tutorial on how to prepare yourself for a financial call. This 10-minute video, we're going to focus on just one of the reports that you get in your financial packet that's emailed to you prior to your financial call. This is the key indicator trend report. That's what we're talking about in this video. So let's get started. At the top of the chart, it's basically going to show you the month, how many days in that month, and then your move-ins and move-outs. So for example, in November, I had 5 move-ins, 1 move-out for positive 4. Pretty self-explanatory. I like to print out these reports and write my notes on it. However, for the sake of this video, we'll type them in here. And you may want to do that as well, because when you type in your notes here, you don't have to remember what you were thinking later when you're on the call and you're on the spot. So let's say, for example, I'm doing my October financial call. Looks like I had 2 move-ins, 6 move-outs for a -4. So what happened with these 6 move-outs? I know because it's hindsight that they were all deaths. But let's say they weren't. Let's say one of them might have been a move out to a competitor, or a move to Seattle to be closer to family. So you're going to want to write in your notes, why did they move out? I mean, you'll want to actually write the reasons why there was move-outs. For me, they were deaths. You can write those in right there so you can remember on your financial call and have it ready to explain when you're on the call. Actual ADC. Accompanied with this, I've also sent out a glossary. The glossary is just basic definitions of terms that you might see on these reports. Actual ADC. Well, what does that mean? You can go to your glossary, and it is alphabetized. We'll go up here, actual ADC. This is the average daily census for the month. Great. So there's our average daily census, 45.9. For example, my community, there are 50 residents total. Here, it's 49.5 memory care. There might be some communities on your reports where it's going to be broken out because you might have different levels. You might have an assisted level, AL, or an IL here. And those are going to affect your average daily census numbers. So for mine, it's pretty simple. 45.9 is the same as my memory care because that's all I got. My budgeted ADC, my budgeted average daily census. Your budget is basically your goal. I don't want to sound condescending on these videos. I'm just explaining it for general because you might be a pro at these financials or you might be a novice. I'm just going to explain it as if you were going through this for the first time. Your budget is basically your goal. So my goal was to have an average daily census of 48. It looks like I underperformed this month. Has a lot to do with that number there because of those 6 deaths. So you can explain that away. I had 6 deaths that lowered my average daily census. It took me a while to get those replaced. I got 4 of them replaced. So my average daily census for December should increase. So I can write my number here. Should increase. Should increase for next month with move-ins. Great. So now I have my note there and I can just quickly recall it when I'm on the call. As percent of budget. What does this mean? You can go to your glossary and you can look up the definition. As percent of budget is basically my percent compared to where I should have been. So because I was lower, I'm at 96%. You want this as percent of budget to be at 100% or more, meaning your average daily census is 48 or above, or whatever your average daily census, your budgeted average daily census should be. Resident days, pretty self-explanatory. 1,377 residence days. Residents were here for overnight and that we billed. My occupancy was 91.8. Looks like I dipped. Why did it dip? Well, that's the reason right there. You're going to go back to that number. Lost revenue. You can look up this definition on your glossary as well. Lost revenue is basically if everything went right, if I had, my occupancy was where it should have been, my expenses were where it should have been. If everything went right, I could have made an extra $19,000 in revenue for that month. So this is money I missed out on if things would have gone right. So that's what that number is. Revenue per unit. This is the amount of revenue you make per unit. A lot goes into this number. Their level of care. What other services are they getting? Are they getting cable TV? Are they private pay or are they Medicaid? Is it a 1-bedroom or is it a studio? This number you can investigate. Why is this number going up or down? If you see it starting to trend down, you might want to look at, what rooms are being occupied. Are your high revenue numbers, units not being occupied? You might want to put a focus into that. Once you figure out why it's trending down, you might make a note of it. Make an action plan. Have something ready to explain to the people on the financial call what you're doing to improve that number. If it's going up, great. Then you celebrate it. Celebrate it on the call. Average base rent. That's another one where that can be affected by what you're charging. So it looks like mine went down. That could be directly related to my Medicaid and private pay mix. Obviously, if I have more Medicaid people than private pay, that number is going to continue to go down because private pay, we get more reimbursement than Medicaid. So we'll keep going. Monthly revenue is pretty self-explanatory. That was my monthly revenue. This is how much it costs to run my community. That's what's left over, the net income. This is my budgeted net income. This is what my goal was. I wanted to make 8,000, made 22, which means I was 14,000 to the good. Great, let's celebrate it. Sometimes, as you can see over here, it doesn't go so well. I was negative 10 grand, so I should have been making, I was under by a lot more. So what you're going to want to do is figure out why that is. And you are going to go through these other reports and in these subsequent videos, you're going to really learn how to dive down into these reports and investigate why you're losing money, if that's the case. Net income as percent of budget. This is basically like your net income compared to what your goal was. So I was 270%. You want this to be at 100% or above, so that's a good number. You want this to be at 100% above. Your revenue as percent of budget. I was above 100%, so good job. Expenses are just the opposite. You want to be at 100% or below. If you're at 100% of your expenses, that's great. You spent exactly the amount that you were supposed to spend to run your business. Looks like I was a little bit over. So in my income statement and my expense detail, I'm going to go over into detail of why I spent more than I should have and my action plans to correct those. So look for those in that video. Ancillary markup, this is something my community needs to work on. Basically, you buy supplies and you sell it for 250% profit. It's a small profit that you use because you're providing a service for your residents. It's a good way to generate extra revenue. Average wellness level, if you see it trending down, looks like you're just going to be taking in less residents. Obviously, the higher the wellness level, the more revenue you're going to make because your care levels are going to be higher. So you wanted to keep a close eye on that. Cost of meals per day. This number can go up or down depending on how many residents you are. For example, if your census goes down, this number is going to skyrocket if you don't make adjustments. So if your census starts to go down, you're going to want to talk to your dining services director and say, hey, are we buying a little bit less food because we have less residents? If you don't, you're going to see this number skyrocket. Accounts receivable, percent over 60 days. You want to be at under a 1.5. Again, all these definitions are on the glossary. Looks like 1.64% of all the money I'm supposed to collect is past 60 days. One of the videos on the aging report you'll see, it's basically you look at that, find out who those people are and why they're not paying. You're going to want to have action plans on how you're going to collect that money when you're on the call. Full-time equivalent variance, we'll go over that on the labor trend. Weighted average rate variance, we'll go over that on the labor trend video. On those, you're just going to want to explain why those numbers are the way they are. Overtime, right here, 3.6. So if you already know, if you've looked at your labor trend, you already know, hey, the reason why that is so high is because there were so many call-outs because of the holidays or people, in my case, our community got the flu. You can write that in there, flu outbreak. It would help if I spelled flu correctly, but you get the point. Wellness hours per resident day. Again, if your census drops, this number will shoot up. And your budgeted wellness hours, so it looks like I was right on, no difference. That's great. It's exactly where you want to be. Total hours per resident day was 3.7. My budget was 3.61, so I was a little bit over. So I'm going to need to investigate on my labor trend. Why was I over for the month? Turnover, you want it below 60. I was at 67, was 0 the month before. Keeping those turnovers down will help on your training costs. So you're going to want to look into that. What kind of programs are you doing to keep people employed? Workers' compensation claims, always want to stay on top of those. Luckily, I have 0 for this month. and that is the key indicator trend report.